Okay, let's get started. Well, today is the 64th Security Thought Leadership webinar. And we've been here every Tuesday and Thursday since this crisis began, looking at topics of direct relevance to the security world. And the idea of thought leadership is that we critique today what's going on in order that we may get a better type of security in the future. And that's an important process, and one that we feel these webinars have contributed to in their own different ways. Today is a topic that has come out of previous webinars. Public sector retirees who join the security industry. How best can they be integrated into modern security? Now, this idea was actually suggested by one of our regular contributors, Glenn Kitteringham. And there are those who argue that retirees from law enforcement, military, etc., have an essential role to play in the future of security. And there are those who argue that the demands of modern security management require a different sort of experience. We're going to be debating it today, and once again we've invited 3 international panelists with expertise directly related to this subject in different ways. So in a moment I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, and once they've done that I will ask each of them to make their opening statement. And once they've done that, we'll come to you, the audience, for any questions that you've got. And if I could ask you to use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen, and do get your questions in early. If you get your questions in early, we'll endeavour to include it. So without further ado, let's introduce our panel. And we go first of all over to Washington and Kelly. Kelly, introduce yourself, please.
Thank you very much, Martin. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. Kelly Stewart here, Managing Director and CEO of Newcastle Consulting. I run my own security consulting group. Been in this business for about 30 years, both in public and private sector entities in various types of roles, and look forward to this discussion.
Excellent, thank you. And back to the United Kingdom, and Peter, introduce yourself, please.
Thanks, Martin. Peter Harrison, Managing Director at FGH Security. So I've been in this role nearly 20 years now. Employ up to 1,000 people, and we specialise in keeping people safe. So not necessarily too much asset protection, but a lot of public protection, large crowd gatherings, or it could be the retail environment or nighttime economy. Interestingly, for this, it is a topic of interest. I've got 12 years experience as a Royal Marine Reservist as well.
Interesting, and good to have you on board, Peter. And then back to New York State, and David, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thanks, Martin, and welcome everyone. My specialty is helping folks transition from the public sector to the private sector, and I've been the corporate head of security at 4 different Fortune 500 companies.
Thank you very much indeed. And didn't I tell you, we bring you people from around the world who know about this topic. Let's hear what they've got to say then. Opening statement, 3 minutes each. Kelly, your opening statement, please.
So how do we get integrated? What do we do, quite frankly? I think it's a dichotomy of a bunch of things. It's one, looking at where do you want to go with your career, number one. Number two, in terms of expertise, is your expertise coming from the public sector to the private sector one that suits the business that you're going to go into? For a long time, the 3-letter agencies have usually filled those top positions. But sometimes there's been a lack of understanding of where to the direction of the company wants to go. Do we lean more on business? Do we lean more on security? Or is it a holistic approach where you have a complete understanding of what you're going to get done or what you want to do? And do you understand that? One benefit that I had in terms of where I've gone with this is I had a mentor to guide me through this entire process, going from the public sector to the private sector, and understanding what the requirements were in the top leadership position and how to formulate a team. So I think there's multiple aspects to understanding, well, how best can we be integrated into that modern security piece? Now, with things changing like they are today, it's a little bit more complicated, a little bit more complex, but a lot of it still grounds itself in the basics of security and of safety. So do we understand it? Do we have the expertise of that? Can we build our team accordingly? And what kind of resources are the companies that we go work for going to give us? Or how can we build them? So it's also a feeling out of where you're going to sit. Because sometimes if you take a position in the top CSO place, does that really fit you? So I think there's a complication in terms of understanding when we jump into modern security, do we necessarily fit within that environment? Is it a cultural thing? Is it an understanding of safety and security? Or is it one where, take for instance, the airline industry, where it's very operationally heavy, and a lot of those operational folks have actually transitioned into the top security position. So where does that play on things? I've helped guide a lot of people in terms of determining what they want to do with their careers. And I think for the most part, it's been an education. So they have to also be willing and open to learn. And sometimes when you get into the retirement aspect, sometimes folks don't want to do that. So it's a matter of that type of openness, that type of holistic challenge, which I think besets and faces us all. But again, it's one where, are we prepared to come into the private sector, and do we know enough, given our security background, as to what that means? Is it a business aspect? For the most part today it is. But then given the current environment with everything kind of being in an upheaval, where does that security piece go into, and what does that do to the business itself?
Gary, thank you very much indeed. Some interesting points there, and we'll pick up on those in our questions. Right, Peter, can we have your opening statement, please?
Yeah, thank you, Martin. I thought I looked at this from two angles. First of all, I employ a lot of ex-public sector personnel, so quite a few from the military, a lot of Royal Marines, Royal Marine Reservists, but also people from the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. But I also employ a few former police officers from varying levels, uniformed and non-uniformed, right up to sort of higher ranks as well, who assist with some of the strategy and the risk process within FGH. And I've spoke to them all this week as well before coming on here, and I've come to the main one main point, which I think is, for someone in the public sector, protection of the public is absolutely key, and that is their main focus, versus someone working in the private sector. And to sustain the business that you're working in, the organisation, profit has to be key. And you will not always be able to throw all the resources at it. I think one thing that was noted is the period of austerity that we went through within the UK, sort of the financial crash, and I'm fairly sure it'd be the same the other side of the Atlantic, but it forced people in the public sector to start taking a bit more note of the financials and having to make some tough decisions with where the spending was. And we've definitely seen that here in the UK, and with the ACPO, Chief Police Officers, cutting back on providing police support at events, for example. But senior police officers would have had to make some tough decisions about redundancies, about budget cuts, forced on them from central government. From a qualifications point of view, often in the public sector, no expense is spared. There's some exceptional training goes on. And I think the industry and the sector have still got some work to do to make sure that qualifications are transferable from the public side to the private side, and vice versa as well. It is changing over time, but we've still got some way to go. And that's it from me for now, Martin.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed, Peter. Just to say to people, if you've got a question, use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. And once we've heard our final opening statement, we'll come to you and start to engage with our panelists. David, your opening statement, please.
Yes, as folks seek to transition from the public sector to the private sector, one of the things that Kelly brought up, I think, is most important. And that is the culture of the organization to which you would like to join. You have to end up in the right culture. That is an imperative. And understand one thing, if you go into the private sector, it's not a retirement job. You better come prepared with a lot of skills to be able to address the needs of the organization. And that requires a lot of preparation. One of the things that I've always tried to do with clients that I work with is to help them prepare. And I advise them, start preparing 2 to 3 years before you decide to transition into the private sector, because you really have to be able to speak to business leaders in business terms and understand the parameters of what their needs are. And the folks that I've been able to work with and help have been very, very successful in their career transition. So, it's going to take a lot of hard work. You have to be a lifelong learner. You have to have a high level of energy, because you're coming out of a structure that is that is very hierarchical in a lot of terms, and you're moving into a very entrepreneurial environment. And that entrepreneurial environment, people are going to question you, and you've got to be ready to work on cross-functional teams and really understand the business. The first thing that I did in joining the different companies where I joined was, for the first 7 or 8 months, I didn't do anything strategically in these huge corporations. I went out and I learned the business. How do they make money and how do they lose money? What are the issues that are interrupting profitability? Because at the end of the day, the bosses want to know, how are you going to help me become more profitable?
Thank you very much indeed, David. Well, look, let's get these questions going, because there's a lot of I'm going to ask all three of you this question. It's from Eddie Sorrells, who says, what is the most important skill that public sector retirees need to develop to succeed in the private security sector? It's a general question. Kelly.
Well, quite frankly, I think David mentioned it. You listen and learn. Be
anything
open.
Security specific. Anything security specific.
So security wise, being able to assess. So I'm in the business of risk assessment and risk analysis. I think that piece of it and understanding that piece is critical to having any position in the corporate sector or that transition, and understanding what that process flow is. It just helps you from a skill set, understand everything, not only from the security perspective, but also the business perspective. So in my humble opinion, it's that piece of a security apparatus and what you're doing. Now, that comes from my background experience with the Secret Service. We were trained to understand our environment immediately. So being self-aware, being aware of your environment and how it rolls into the risk equation is, quite frankly, I think, where a basis of a lot of people transitioning out of their current jobs in the public sector into the private sector.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move to Peter. Peter, your view?
I'd be looking more for a sort of financial qualification, and to make sure that if you've not received that sort of financial knowledge and training in the public sector, that you're getting it before you step into the private sector, because it's very easy for people to have a police career or a military career, or other elements of the public sector, but never really get involved in any financial negotiations, conversations, and they just need to be grounded and realistic in their approach when they are tackling the private sector. Sometimes the best solution is not the solution that the client is going to go for, because the figures have to add up in the end.
Yeah, okay. David, you mentioned a similar thing in your opening statement, to sort of understand the business and the business process. The most important, Eddie asks.
I think the most important thing is you have to be able to understand the skills that you're bringing, the training, the network, your background, your know-how, from the public sector to the private sector. And you have to be able to put that into what I call corporate speak. You have to be able to translate that for business leaders so that they understand that you're going to make it safer, more secure, and you're also there, just like everybody else, to make it more profitable. So I think one of the key elements is really flexibility. You really have to step back and listen to folks who are in the business, and don't approach them in saying, you know, you need to do this or you need to do that. Your job really is to understand their environment and then take stuff off their desk to so that they can concentrate on their business needs.
Okay, now here's a question from Peter Fraser Hopewell, and one of the things he talks about is that whether there's a perception about what people can bring. Do you think the modern security world really understands what public retirees bring? I mean, perhaps particularly from the police and military. And I'm thinking here, the point all three of you are making in your different way, that someone coming into the sort of commercial security world has got to get business savvy. I use my words, but you're all sort of feeding into that.
Right.
That would suggest to me they're not an obvious contender for a job in the security sector, a commercial security sector. I mean, are they misunderstood, Kelly?
I believe perception is reality. So I look at it from the perspective, what do they understand about what we do, and vice versa? And it's an education, quite frankly, because take, for instance, some of the positions that I've held, their understanding of security was more based on stuff that was coming out of the news as opposed to what was realistic on skill sets that I was bringing to the table. So whether or not they would ignore that, they had a different understanding as to what that would be and where you would take things. Also, it's, do you really understand business, and can you convince them of that? And I think it goes to David's point in terms of just, okay, you have to take a step back, understand them, but they also have to understand you and understand.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that. I mean, Peter, this is an interesting point, isn't it? I mean, all of you have mentioned being business savvy. It's not an obvious place, therefore, to think, why should we recruit public sector retirees? I mean, it's just got this sort of this word security link, but it's a very different type of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think sometimes, though, in the public sector, there's, you know, to counter argue some of this, there's certain skills that are just not available in the private sector at the moment. And I'm partway through a qualification with a company called Storm Consulting here in the UK. It's a level 6 diploma in counter-terrorism, risk management and planning. And this qualification is only just available this year for civilians. Up until that point, there's no civilian who can be qualified to competently complete a risk assessment against counter-terrorism. And this is a qualification that's widely available within the police. There's an awful lot of expertise there, an awful lot of knowledge within that group and shared between not just the police, but organisations such as CPNI and MI5. And it's
in a sense, Peter, then what you're getting from the public sector then are skill sets that are difficult to derive from any other source. So that is a very distinct offering they bring.
Yeah, these qualifications and that skill set is currently not available to anywhere near the extent the public sector's got it at the moment.
I mean, David, I mean, obviously this is an area where you're very familiar with. Do you think we make enough of this? That, I mean, the modern language is more about some of the limitations here. Perhaps then we ought to just remember there is an enormous lot of security knowledge and experience, and I use that word security broadly, that we must make use of, because the commercial sector would be a lot worse off without it, wouldn't it?
Yes, very definitely. And the challenge that I had was because the companies that I stepped into had never had a corporate security function. So all 4 Fortune 500 companies had never had a senior security leader. So my responsibility was to not only come in and assess the needs of the business, but also to make sure that the folks that I brought onto my team had a skill set that blended well with the needs of the organization. And I was the one who had to market to all of my senior executives. They would say, like my last company was a major energy company. And I had one executive corner me on a call, and he said, David, he says, what do you bring to the table? I said, it's real simple. I ensure the safe, secure delivery of our energy to our customers. And you have to be able to market yourself in business terms. One of the things that I do with clients is that I make sure that they have reading lists and are well prepared in the jargon of business, because coming out of the public sector, that is often not a skill set that is readily available. So you really have to understand, how business leaders view things. And one of the things that I coach folks coming out of the public sector is, don't start telling war stories right off the bat, because business leaders will say, gee, David did a lot of investigations and, arrested a lot. But what does that do for me? What does that do for my business? Because they're interested in how you're going to have a positive impact on their bottom line, how you're going to help them become more profitable.
Yeah, okay. I mean, Peter, you mentioned a point about training there. Brian Sims raises this point, a question he's got about whether there should be some sort of baseline qualification. I guess the thing is, Peter, it strikes me as a bit odd that in modern day, there hasn't been more emphasis on this training element. I mean, out there, we've got an enormous resource of those, at least in the UK, they leave the police and military relatively young. I mean, we're still a second career to go. I mean, do you think the security sector has been remiss in not making that an easier transition? Peter?
I think there's potentially space in the market for a course offering just that, transitioning from the public to the private side of the sector. There's a enormous amount of training courses available on the market, and I suppose it's making sure people have got mentors, people like David, who can assist and point people in the right direction of which course to sit on. I often get asked by people leaving the military, and they'll say, look, I've got these learning credits, what shall I do? And I think some companies have just shouted the loudest, and there's an awful lot of people who leave the military and they do a level 3 in close protection. It was the best course they could get paid to go on, and they'll do that before they go.
Yeah, okay. I mean, David, would you say it's the same over there? I mean, I know that you yourself consult on people making that transition, but do you think the security sector has embraced this enough in terms of making it easy and making building on the potential to transition people?
Well, I think over the last 20 years, there's been quite an expansion in the private sector of very qualified private sector security professionals. And that is the competition for people coming out of the public sector. So they have to be prepared to be able to be on a firmer footing with folks in the private sector, and that preparation is really essential. I mean, at the end of the day, if I don't have the right skills to be able to do investigations and forensics and assessments, etc., and a lot of that is available through, take for instance, ASIS and getting a certified protection professional certification, the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, and becoming a CFE, which was one of the first things that I did before I became into the private sector.
Yeah, okay. I mean, Kelly, you've made this transition, and of course, I know that I've heard you speak about this in various forums. I mean, I wonder whether you think the private security sector is tough. Let me just build on a question from Dennis Shep on this.
Okay.
And Dennis Shep has asked the question, Kelly, about whether associations, how they can facilitate this, and whether enough is going on there. Kelly, a bit closer to your heart, that one, I think. What's your thoughts?
I mean, I quite frankly think we've done a poor job in terms of building that aspect of helping mentor and transition folks from public to private sector. I think the associations, as well as all of us in security have a responsibility of how do we get that educational or that career part established. And we had it at one point about 5 to 6 years ago, and then we dropped the ball completely on it. I think associations like the Security Industry Association, ASIS, some fraud examiners, and some of the other more specific things have done an all right job, but I really don't think they've tackled this whole piece of how do people transition properly in an effective manner. I think the individuals like David, myself, Peter, when we deal on these things, it's more of an individual thing as opposed to an association thing.
What's the barrier though? I mean, Kelly, you're a good person. What's the barrier for associations to get more engaged in this sort of this angle?
I think it's direction. I think one of the associations wanted to pursue more in the stance of, we'll give you the resources to a certain extent, but we're going to concentrate on events as opposed on education. So it's, do they stick to their core competency, and do they want to be holistic in what they build? I think it's also a problem of direction. Fraud examiners, they know exactly what they're going to do. ASIS and SIA, the Security Industry Association, it's sometimes rudderless. I'm not going to say that's a full extent. I enjoy both the organizations and what they do, but sometimes they're all over the place and they're not focused. And I think it's up to us to help them focus on how do we build this program for people coming out, because a lot of it's also mentorship. A lot of it is self-awareness too. But then it's up to us also in the private sector to help that aspect out. One thing that we've been tackling in, let's say, ASIS is, okay, how do we do that? And we've been doing that for the past 2 to 3 years. We have kind of the skeletal structure, but we haven't really executed on what that should be done to do it properly.
Okay, David, your thoughts?
Martin, one of the big failures, I think, for folks coming out of the public sector is that here in the States, every agency has a retirement seminar. And the retirement seminars, I compared to, they're giving the same information that they did in 1947. They're not preparing people to go out into a real career today. And I've approached several agencies asking to give, a 2 to 3 hour presentation pro bono just for their organization, so that people realize when you step out, you have to be prepared, okay? Because when you cross that threshold, it's not like, today's a new day and where's my new job? Because you really have to be ready to be very in tune with the needs of business.
Interesting.
And I haven't been able to get organizations really to bite on that. And
what's the barrier though, David? What's the barrier? It sounds obvious.
I think it's a cultural barrier that we've done this for so many years, and at the retirement seminar, at the end of your career, we're just going to continue, going over the forms, the insurance forms, and this is what your benefits are, et cetera. But they're not preparing people to step out. And a lot of people are getting out at very young ages and have tremendous talents and skills and know-how, but they're not prepared to come out and really meet business on business's terms.
Okay, thank you. Peter, building on this, here's a question for you, and it's a question from Noah Price. You run a business, you're right at the sharp end, the buck rests with you and your organization. Is there a balance in your mind about how many people from the public sector it's good to have? Is there a sort of rule of thumb on this, or is it just by the individual? Peter?
That's an interesting one, that. So I have to put together teams for all sorts of projects. diversity within any team is always good. And the absolute best teams, if I had a key problem I needed to solve, or a client who needed a solution, a balanced team, a team which maybe had, you know, a couple of people from ex-military on, someone from the ex-police in there, and some civilians as well, would be the absolute best team. It's interesting, the ex-forces people, especially when we were away working on tasks, crowd management tasks, or large music festivals, for instance, they tend to sort of gravitate together, and we'll often have a corner of the campsite with its own sort of standards and regulations, and even within that corner of the campsite, there'll be the Royal Marines corner and the tankies and the Grenadier Guards and the Army together. It's an interesting dynamic, but where we get the most from them is when they do integrate and they pass some of their skills over to the people in the private sector, and vice versa as well.
Okay, very briefly, Kelly, do you have a view about this balance? I mean, is it an important consideration or not, Kelly?
Balance in terms of security as well as knowledge, or?
No, balance in terms of, Noah's question is more aimed at, in an organization, does one need to balance the number of public and private, former public, with private sector employees, or is it just done on the individual? I mean, does it matter if they were all one or the other, I suppose?
I think it's a combination of both. I think the balance needs to be there. You got to have a diverse team. Just like Peter, when I formulate teams to go and we go do assessments, it's based on skill set. And sometimes it's a non-security person. So do those skills incorporate itself into the organization? And like with David, with the position he held, well, you have to balance. Yes, okay, does the person I'm going to bring in work well with the given skill set to what they're going to do? And given they're going to be on my security team, but also what else are they going to learn? And are you willing to develop that whole thing? So I think the balance is critical, because you can also learn from one another in terms of other skill sets that you have. One thing I did on my teams when I was a CSO was we cross-pollinated, because we didn't have necessarily the resources financially to afford to bring on somebody else. So we had to train each other on other things that we did.
Yeah, okay. Let me just move on quickly, because I want to get through some of these questions. Really good questions, actually. Thank you. Questions from, I think it's Michael Odo, and excuse me, Michael, I haven't got that quite right. David, this point about, do you think corporate security, this modern corporate security management can succeed without the wealth of experience from the public sector, former public sector employees? Just as a background to this, David, it wasn't long ago, as part of my research, I was discussing this issue with an organization that was appointing a former, very senior military officer to the head of security, very well-known company, you'd all know it, wherever you are in the world. And I said, but the modern idea is to go for someone with a business experience, which this individual hasn't got. And the response came back, listen, we deal with the public sector a lot. We need someone who can speak to the public sector. That's the most important thing. David, this point about whether corporate security, modern corporate security management, does it need former public sector employees?
You know, I think it does, because it's really, you have to be able to pull in your public sector partners on various aspects of business security issues, whether you're talking about dealing with law enforcement, dealing at the federal, state, or local level. You have to be able to talk in terms and have relationships. One of the things that I think that public sector leaders bring is that they bring a great network of other leaders from the public sector that are kind of in their hip pocket when they need it. And, you know, conversely, when in going into business, my focus was, I knew that I didn't know everything about the needs of a particular organization. So one of the things that I did was I built a security thread through human resources, through corporate communications, through the finance department, through logistics, through operations. And I went out and educated, and those people educated me as to what their needs were and the struggles that they were having, be it in workplace violence, be it in harassment, be it in theft, be it in vendor fraud, whatever the issues were that had a nexus to security. And so I went in with the idea that I'm not going to build a large security team. Matter of fact, the largest security team I ever had was 5 people, and that was in a $60 billion company. And people would say to me, how the heck can you have an impact? And we've got 50,000 employees around the world. How can you have an impact with 5 people? And I said, you know, once you have the chairman and the CEO and the executive leadership buy into what you're doing, everybody else, that leadership trickles down. And one of the points that I've always made with all of my executive leaders is at various points, I'm going to come to you and I'm going to ask you for your leadership. And I'm not going to come to you with just nilly-willy little issues. These are important issues that are having an impact on the business and things that you need to know about. My expectation is I'm going to have your leadership. And I addressed that right up front before I joined any of the organizations that I joined.
Okay. Peter, do you need public sector employees? Do you need them?
I think in certain sectors, they are absolutely crucial. Myself, we don't need them, but I really benefit from employing them. And I'll just mention another example, and it's I've got a friend who was a stadium safety officer. He's in charge of all the security and crowd management and keeping the public safe on football days for a big English Premier League football club. He was the only civilian in his role across all 20 Premier League clubs. The other 19 were all retired police. What they have the skill sets to deal with that level of public order that you can encounter, and it's just not possible to get that very easily. In the private sector, there's certain experiences that the police or the military will deal with and be trained in, competent in scenarios that are recreated that are not possible to get recreated in the private sector.
Interesting, very interesting. Kelly, do you think, I mean, a question from Matthew Porcelli is whether it varies much by geography or by sector. Is your sense that the value will vary in security depending on the type of security? I mean, I'm just wondering whether when we talk about the value of public sector retirees to the security sector, can we talk in general terms, or is it going to vary greatly?
A good question. I think it'll vary dependent upon your skill set and also what you're interested in. Take for instance, I'll give you for instance my own career. When I got out of government, I mean, I completely went in a different direction, and my focus was actually to detach myself from security and work for a corporation that mainly dealt with printing. Now, given on the side, I helped them also establish their security apparatus, but that was more of a consultancy as opposed to what I was really doing. So in terms of geography or typology, I mean, the other piece of it is then I also did consulting work. I did work with National Nuclear Security Administration. So completely off of what I did, but focused in on my skill sets for what was important to them. Yeah. So I hate to answer it as it depends, but it does depend, because geography plays a large role in it, depending upon where you are in the country or the world. But then you can also translate your skill sets, but depending upon what you have, to any industry or any vertical you might want to go into. And then again, I always want to focus in on the mentoring piece. I had a great guy that I always turned to in my former life that just helped me along. So for me, it was, I'm not going to say a very easy aspect to tackle, but I had a good person to bounce things off of in terms of what I was thinking with regard to that.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question from Charlie Swanson, a former panelist. And Charlie's point is a really good one, I think, which is that we've been talking about this for years and years and years. There's nothing new in this topic. And I wonder where we have to move to. What are the big steps we need to make in order to really maximize the potential to recruit to best advantage or to engage with best advantage? David, let me come to you first.
You know, where we have to go is really lifelong learning. One of the things that I continue to do, I stay up on all kinds of security issues, political issues, what's going on. You really have to have that desire to help people and learn, and that's one of the prerequisites for anybody who joined any of my teams, was that they had to really focus on extending themselves and into a lifelong learning procedure. Because and a number of the folks that were on my teams have gone on to become chief security officers and senior security leaders in other corporations, and they're all very successful. And they do that because there was, you know, I felt that I mentored them in a way in which they were able to adapt and grow additional new strengths that they didn't have before.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to put that to you as well. Final statement from you, Kelly, on Charlie's question. Where do we go from here?
I think David hits it: education, awareness, and competency. We were dealing with a competency model with one of the associations in terms of where that was going to go for career path. And to David's point, I did the same thing in terms of the people. The one question I would ask is, how are you going to improve your trade craft when you're here? What are you going to do to learn about the business, but also what are you going to do about improving what you know and understand? I've always taken the stance that you're educating yourself every day about our business as well as what's going on. And I don't think you can deviate about that. The future of where we're going to go, where we are going to be successful, is educating not only the people coming out, but also putting in a structure to say that this is a career path. I still think we're stuck on the fact that we don't know whether or not it is or not. And we still have to improve upon what that is.
Yeah, fair point. Thank you. Okay, finally to you, Peter. Final comment, if you wouldn't mind, on Charlie Swanson's question, which is specifically about where do we go from here?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the UK we are doing well. There is more integration than ever before. I know in the military side of things, there's the Armed Forces Covenant, the new sort of SABRE scheme, which organisations can sign up to. We can go and visit military personnel prior to them leaving and put on open days and engage a lot with them. And I think on the police side as well, police and the private security are working closer together than ever before. When I first started in this industry, the police, you know, security had such a bad reputation here in the UK 20 years ago. The police would not give you the time of day. Whereas now we're out on joint patrols with them. You know, we've got a phone book of police officers at all sorts of levels that we can speak to help work together to keep people safe. So I do think we're doing a good job. Maybe a bit more to do, and exactly what that is, I don't know. But I think by continuing to work together in the guys that we are doing at the moment, we will get there. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, look, fantastic conversation, and thank you very much indeed, panel, for your thoughts. I mean, this is a topic, right, that has got enormous implications, and it does feel like one. And I think the panel has sort of confirmed my views on this, that we haven't really grappled with yet in any structural way. It's still left a bit piecemeal. It's reflected in the training. It's reflected, I think, as Kelly said, in the work of associations, and what an opportunity we're missing. Another one in the security sector. We'll pick up on this again going forward. We'll come back to it in the future. Thank you once again, panel, for your insights. Just to say to you all that we are still got opportunities to engage with the OSPAs in Germany, Romania. You've only got till the end of the month, 29th in Germany, 30th in Romania. And we've opened them up in South Africa. So get your nominations in. And Peter Harrison, who's was one of the panelists today, is a multiple OSPA winner. And that's what happens when you're OSPA, when you get to appear on the webinar. Must say, Benelux, 24th of November, get this date in your diary if you wouldn't mind, please. It's the Benelux OSPA's award ceremony plus a thought leadership summit. We're going to be doing both on the same day. Free to attend, it's virtual, 24th of November. You can get there either from the OSPA's website or from that email address. And the Kenya was soon to announce the award ceremony in Kenya. Stand by for that. And the TECA, Tackle Economic Crime Awards, 9th of December. Stand by for more information. Finally, to let you know that we'll have our 65th Security Thought Leadership webinar next Tuesday. The challenges of achieving consistency and standardization in global security operations. We've got another elite panel, another international panel. And we'll be continuing these webinars all the way to Christmas at least and beyond. We're here every Tuesday and Thursday, some other days too, where we're debating issues of critical importance to the security sector now in order that we may have a better type of security in the future. So thanks once again to Hannah Miller and to Christine Brooks in the background. To you, the audience, for your engaging questions and chat. Thank you very much indeed. And most of all to my panel for their insights. And this subject is going to continue, I'm sure it's not going to go away. Ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are in the world, until we meet again, and I hope it's on next Tuesday, stay safe.
Thank you very much, Martin.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Martin.
Martin, thanks, guys.